Welcome everyone to accelerateHER Live and to London Tech Week Connects. I'm Laura Stebbing, I'm co-CEO of accelerateHER, and I'm delighted to have you all with us this afternoon. A little bit about accelerateHER if you're new to our community. accelerateHER is a global event series and network taking action to change the underrepresentation of women in technology in order to secure an inclusive future across all business. The driving force behind accelerateHER is that we are women first, uniting women and men to drive societal change through technology. Our belief is that technology is the future, but that currently the future is not looking very female, with women just representing just 17% of tech founders, only 25% of tech roles being held by women, and just 5% of tech leadership positions. This is much worse for women of colour. While women founders across the board last year raised just 2.7% of VC funding, Project Diane's research shows that startups led by Black women in the US raised just 0.006%. We're ending the day today with an important panel exploring what we, as the tech industry, can and should be doing to dismantle the systemic racism that pervades our society, and we'll double down on our efforts across accelerateHER to profile, connect, and support women of colour across everything we do. I hope you'll stay with us for an incredible day of content on everything from leading with a gender lens to pivoting under COVID-19, to cybersecurity and the future of work, to mental health and micro steps, to the state of the world for women with Hillary Clinton, Cherie Blair, and Dame Vivian Hunt. In the meantime, I'm delighted to hand over to our accelerateHER co-founder, Brent Hoberman.
Thank you so much, Laura, and to the amazing accelerateHER team. Welcome to accelerateHER Live as part of London Tech Week's LTW Connects in partnership with Founders Forum. Today is just a taster. We'll be back on September the 9th for accelerateHER's flagship event during London Tech Week. I hope today stimulates narratives and connections that will be amplified in September when we gather again, perhaps in person as well as online. Though it's going to be perhaps a challenge to better today's list of A-list top star speakers. I do also want to thank our sponsors, without whom obviously none of this would have been possible. Microsoft M12, Intel Capital, Henkel X Ventures, McKinsey, Google, Wilson Sonsini, London Stock Exchange, and Lakestar. So why are we here today? We've heard some of the stats from Laura, and clearly part of the purpose of accelerateHER is to improve diversity and inclusion, which is now more important than ever. How can we do that? What can we do to change these stats? Well, we'd obviously love to see an increase in the number of successful women founders. We want to improve access to funding, we want to connect the community to the knowledge, networks, and partnerships that can catalyze their business growth. Sponsorship and i.e. mentoring always plays a big part. We'd love to see more women as angel investors and board members, etc. We can see the improvements in the talent pipeline through entrepreneurship in schools and digital training, and we can see affirmative action in the recruitment funnel. So accelerateHER and Male Champions of Change Global Tech Group has been established to help with some of these actions. Liz Broderick is the founder of MCC, and she will tell you far more shortly. And we're pleased that we have some of our leading lights of the MCC, some of those CEOs with us for the first panel, which is entitled Leading with Purpose. And as we look to diversity and inclusion more broadly, we are excited that we have been able to announce this week that the Black Tech Fest will take place in October. This is led by one of our glorious ex-employees who co-founded Color in Tech and London Tech Week. So we've been in discussion about this actually well before the Black Lives Matter movement, but it's an even more timely moment to do it. There is obviously lots more to be done, and no doubt that the impressive speakers lined up for you this afternoon will inspire much more action, uniting men and women to drive societal change through technology and innovation. Quick housekeeping, rules of engagement. We would love you to ask questions, so please submit your questions via the Q&A box, which is on the right of your screen. And one of the most exciting things about virtual events that we do is you can still meet people. So there is the opportunity using Grip, our sister company, for AI-powered networking. So on the left-hand menu on the homepage, connect with attendees and find your curated list of best matches. Lastly, join us on social media at #AHLive and #LTWConnects. Now to hand back to Laura for the rest of this afternoon. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you so much, Brent. I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome this all-star panel of global leaders who will talk about why leading with a gender lens is so important and why for many it's been a critical factor in weathering the pandemic. accelerateHER is delighted to be co-hosting this session with the Male Champions of Change Global Tech Group, which we co-founded almost 2 years ago with Elizabeth Broderick and her organisation, the Male Champions of Change. I'm delighted to introduce Liz now. As Australia's longest-serving Sex Discrimination Commissioner, Elizabeth worked tirelessly to break down structural and social barriers faced by women and men and to promote gender equality. She established and convenes the Male Champions of Change strategy and led the review into the treatment of women in the Australian Defence Force. In 2017, Liz was appointed by the United Nations in Geneva as a special rapporteur and independent expert on discrimination against women and girls. We are so lucky to have her for this session, and I'm delighted to hand over to her now.
Thank you so much, Laura. And also thank you, Brent. Laura and Brent have just been such wonderful partners in our Male Champions of Change Global Tech Strategy. So it's just a delight to be here at the online event. I want to welcome everyone to our panel, Leading with Purpose, and we're going to give you a view from the CEO and Chair today. It's wonderful that we've got so many people joining us, and people are joining us from every region of the world across multiple time zones. So wherever here is for you today, I'm happy that you're here with us. Before I begin, I'm sitting here in Sydney on Indigenous land, and I want to acknowledge our First Nations people and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. I'm delighted today to be joined by our panel of 3 globally recognised business leaders, and you can see them on the screen. I'll be introducing them in a minute, but we have Sharon White, who you will know as Chair of John Lewis. We have Federico Marchetti, who will shortly be seen. There he is, there's Federico, who's the CEO of YOOX Net-a-Porter. And finally there we have Steve Demetriou, Chair and CEO of Jacobs. Each one of our panelists is not just committed to equality in all its forms, but is actually taking strong action to ensure that their organisations and the communities they serve are diverse and inclusive. And we're going to hear about that today because they lead with purpose, but don't take it from me. Shortly we'll hear from them. But before I kick off, I thought I'd just make a few introductory short remarks about gender equality in the time of COVID, and I'll take a very wide lens. But in my role as the United Nations Chair Rapporteur on discrimination against women and girls across the world, I'm seeing the gendered impact of COVID. We know that the pandemic does not affect everyone equally. Indeed, those with less power and influence will be affected to a much greater degree, and that's the case for women and racial minorities. But my UN working group has been closely monitoring the gendered impacts of COVID. We're examining the unequal burden of unpaid care and domestic work on women, and which is escalating dramatically, particularly when you think of in many countries of the world, young children are out of childcare, our kids are out of school. We've got our elderly relatives who are increasingly vulnerable to COVID, and the amount of unpaid work is significantly increasing. We're also seeing the increased incidence of domestic and family violence. And we need to remember that coming into COVID-19, already there were 980 million women across the world who were either at that time living in an intimate relationship characterised by physical violence or had done so in the past. For those women, home is the least safe place on the planet. And indeed, when you look at the shelter at home strategies, the lockdowns, they're disproportionately negatively impacting on women. We're also examining the economic impact of a pandemic, or what some people are referring to as the she recession, because the fact is that women are often employed in more precarious roles, they're employed in the informal economy, and they're losing their jobs at a faster rate than men. Just if I look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics from the US, just in the month of April, around those that lost their job, 55% of the 20.5 million jobs that were lost were the jobs of women. Indeed, from February, when women's unemployment rate in the US was 3.1, it's now jumped to 15%. And similarly, adult male rates of unemployment have increased, but not as high. They're at 13%. And women of colour fared worse, with unemployment rates for Black women at 16.4% and Hispanic women at 20.2%. What we know is that for Indigenous women, for women of colour, gender and cultural background intersect and compound the barriers for these women in terms of entering the workforce, but also in terms of accessing leadership roles. The other area we're examining is the absence of women's voices in national task forces put together by countries in the recovery and rebuilding phase. And finally, I just wanted to highlight to you the restrictions on women's access to sexual health and reproductive rights at the minute. In many countries of the world, abortion has been declared a non-essential service with the resulting impact on women and particularly poor women. So while this pandemic is first and foremost a global human crisis, we must not lose sight of particular impacts on women globally, because right at the minute we have a choice. We have a choice to emerge from COVID-19 with more deeply entrenched patterns of gender inequality, or to take decisions now in this environment of rapid decision-making that will harness the opportunities to build more capable, more productive, but most importantly, more inclusive organisations. And that's really what the Male Champions Change Global Tech Strategy is all about. It's about taking strong and intentional action to create a more gender equal world, a more gender equal tech sector. You might ask, well, why are we putting the accountability and responsibility for change on men? I mean, after all, it was the collective action of women that actually delivered most of the rights that women have across the world today. But what we've come to understand is that to rely solely on women to deliver the change is illogical, because in most countries of the world, women still don't hold the levers of power. They're held largely, although of course not exclusively, but largely by men. As one of our male champions of change said, he said, let's not pretend that there aren't already established norms that advantage men. Men invented the system, men largely run the system. Now men need to step up beside women to change that system. And that's really what the Male Champions of Change Global Tech Group is doing. It's stepping up beside women to create change. As Laura said, we began about a year and a half ago now, and every CEO who's part of that group commits to changing systems of gender inequality, starting within their own business. They listen, they learn, and then they take strong action together with women to drive change. So today on our call, I want to give a special shout out and a special welcome to all those tuning in from our Global Tech Group companies who are supporting the GTG Live launch. Thanks for being with us. It's a great delight to have you on the line. So with that introduction then, I'm going to begin our conversation today with Sharon, Federico and Steve. And I'm going to start macro, because one of the things that I've learned is it's not so much what you do, it's why you do it that really matters. Because if you're deeply committed to something, that's when we see impact. So I'm going to start, and maybe Sharon, I could start with you as a really leading businesswoman, as a chair of one of the best known retailers across the world, and also with a strong commitment to flexibility and D&I. I was just wondering, can you start by telling us why you choose to spend a not insignificant amount of your time dedicated to diversity and inclusion?
Elizabeth, thank you so much. And like others, it's a fantastic opportunity. It feels like a real privilege to have some time to talk about this incredibly as a vital issue. I guess in terms of motivation, I guess everybody's a product of their own background, and I was born in the UK, but my parents both came to the UK in the late 50s, early 60s as part of the Windrush generation. And I think my mother was a working woman and a working mother. And growing up in the 70s and 80s, that was incredibly unusual. She had trained as a dressmaker in Jamaica, and she spent 30, 40 years of her life in fashion, but actually as a machinist, as a dressmaker. And she was such a role model for me, because I just assumed everybody worked, and I assumed that that women worked and mothers worked, and that part of the sort of constraints she had in terms of getting on was very much because of the product of her own education and background. She barely completed primary school in Jamaica. She left school when she was 10 or 11 because she had siblings to look after. So I grew up very much with a sense that women can do it all. And even though I was a black woman, black girl growing up as a minority in the UK, I've always had a sort of burning passion and a burning expectation that opportunities should not be, shouldn't be capped either because of the colour of your skin or your gender. And it was interesting for me personally, because I've been married for years, but I had my kids quite late, when I was in my late 30s and 40s. And it's the first point in my career that suddenly I started to have those conversations of, well, Sharon, do you really want to work? And who's going to look after, who's going to do the childcare? And I thought, well, my husband, why are you having this conversation with me and not him? And it may have been my naivety, but it really struck me, and I was probably, I was quite senior at the time, just how easy it is for the doors to be closed. And really, I think for me, since having my kids, I've become an absolute sort of passionate evangelist and hopefully activist in terms of some of the changes we've been able to affect in the businesses and organisations I've worked in. That really wants it to become the norm that women, black women, it's not news that they're in great jobs and founding companies and running companies and chairing companies. So that's for me, that's my personal motivation. Is very much being the sort of second generation immigrant daughter of a very, very hard working class mother.
Thanks so much, Sharon, and wonderful story. Thank you. Steve, if I can hand to you.
Yeah, Liz, thank you. My personal story really is an evolution, over time. It started as a child, a son of Greek immigrants in the United States in Boston, and my father had a restaurant, and with his brother, my uncle Peter. And it was interesting because I got to work there and watch two different leaders. One that, had his head down, my uncle, and didn't really interact with people and really think about the culture, and versus my dad, who just had oozed with inspiration and included everyone and made everyone feel equally. And so as I evolved as a business leader, I recognize that if you inspire, you engage, you give a sense of purpose to an organization, then you're going to get the best out of that organization. And when I joined Jacobs in 2015, 55,000 people globally, amazing, diversity across the globe. What I found was a company that was all white men, sitting all in one office in California. And so what became a great opportunity to really start with gender diversity. And I was fortunate to meet you, Liz, and get engaged with the Male Champions for Change on the Global Tech Group, but also the Catalyst CEO Champions for Change. And I, it helped me again learn a lot and actually get some of the facts around business. And I'm sure later on we'll talk a little more about specific metrics around diversity. But at the end of the day, what we've achieved over the last several years, my personal drive now is that it's got a great business purpose. The best companies out there that are most creative, innovative, best retention, best growth rate, shareholder value are companies that are diverse and have an inclusive area, and it obviously has to start with gender diversity, because when you talk about diversity, that's the largest group of diverse talent out there, and so my purpose has evolved from just the way I grew up to recognizing it's great business.
Thanks very much, Steve. And I should say to everyone on the call today that we're joining you from different locations, but we think Federico's got the best location. He's joining us from Lake Como. So we've got Dallas, where Steve is, Sharon's in London, and I'm in Sydney, but it's over to you, Federico, to tell us from Lake Como why it is that you care so much about diversity and inclusion. Thanks.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Yeah, I'm doing 50% smart working from here and 50% working in the office out of Milan, where we have one of the two headquarters. One is Milan and the other one is London. So I think to answer your question, I think I have two answers. One is a business answer and the other one is a personal answer. So starting from the business, when I invented YOOX in '99, and actually we are about to celebrate our 20th anniversary in this month of June, because we opened the doors of YOOX.com on June 20th. I thought that the best way to serve our customers was to mirror the customer base with the people working at YOOX. So given that we have 2/3 of women shopping on our websites, that now is no more only YOOX, but is YOOX Net-a-Porter, so YOOX, Net-a-Porter, Mr. Porter, and the Outnet. I think the best idea to serve our customers was to have the right representation, the right mix between men and women, because the assumption was that women can understand women better. And in fact, we have 50% of our executive committee that is made by women. We have 65% of our 5,500 people that are women. And also, even in tech, which is usually underrepresented for women, we have 1/3 of the people, engineers, data scientists that are women. And actually, every year we are making a progression, also thanks to the contribution of the measurement. The personal reason behind it, behind the fact that I've been devoting so much time to the advancement of women, is because I do believe, since ever, so it's not something new, it's not since I joined Male Champion of Change, that the mix is stronger. So when you have a mix of cultures, of genders, of sexual orientations, when people from different nationalities, people also from different industries, now artists together with data scientists, fashion with technology, which is the origin of my invention, I think you can make a stronger business, because you are more open to innovation, more open to new things, you bring new perspectives to the table. And this is also my life, in the sense that my life is a mix. I have friends from all over the world and from so many different industries. My family is a mix, because I'm Italian, but my wife is British. My daughter is half British and half Italian. And I believe that obviously there are challenges and difficulties in putting together different mix, but I think the overall result is amazing. And that's the reason why.
Thanks so much, Federico. I think everyone can see that every one of our panelists, really, it's something that each of you have been born with. It's who you are in the world. And I think, when we see that, we know why each one of you is such great leaders on diversity and inclusion. And not only that, it makes the business better, I think, is what we're hearing very, very clearly. So through the work that we've been doing together, we're working on areas such as eradicating everyday sexism and racism in the workplace, improving the talent pipeline, and particularly women's representation in leadership, the care and parental leave policies, and indeed flexible work under COVID. I mean, just went to show that it was probably habit and inertia that was holding us back, because we were able to take 25,000 or however many from the office to home within a weekend. So it's actually had an accelerant in many ways. But I'd just be interested in these areas and in the areas that have been in your business. What is the one or two really high impact initiatives that you've worked on or that you've seen really deliver an outcome in the organisation? And maybe Sharon, if I could just start off by asking you that.
No, thanks, Liz. And this is slightly caveated because I've been chairman of the partnership for 4.5 months, so most of which has been COVID related. And the partnership, as I'm sure those listening, is very unusual in that we are the biggest, certainly the biggest in the UK, one of the biggest in the world, employee-owned businesses. So we're almost effectively a social enterprise whose purpose is really about sort of decent work and sort of equality. So any money we make effectively gets invested back into partners and into customers. And so that's a very sort of that's a really important starting point for us. I think what's really interesting, and I think it relates a bit to Federico's point about sort of, the customers mirroring the employees, is that actually as a business we have, I think, been very strong on sexual orientation. Obviously as a business that employs is majority women, but actually where we've got really stuck has been the progression and really bringing talent through the organisation at senior levels. And one of the things that we are really starting to tackle in its sort of early days is the way we've set up career paths. So classically, for the partnership, if you want to move up, you need to be very mobile. So you need to be prepared to work in a store in London, or another one in 200 miles away in Manchester, another one that's up in Scotland, another 200 miles away. And we've almost sort of built in career paths, or had built in career paths, which have made it very, very difficult if you've got caring responsibilities or if you need flexibility. And I think, as you say, Liz, I think what the pandemic, with all its awfulness, has demonstrated is actually the ability to work remotely and more flexibly than any of us had ever dreamt. And I think that's as much applicable actually for some of our store-based staff unexpectedly, some of our regional managers who run stores, as it is for our headquarters. So I think that's going to be really important for us going forward. I think the other area for us is probably more on ethnic diversity, where again, I would say we are, we're a little bit at the foothills within the partnership, but reverse mentoring, of which there's obviously been a lot of debate with Black Lives Matter and the terrible pictures and very difficult debate over the last few days. But one of the interesting issues for us is really that for many of our partners, actually sort of feeling the lived experience of being Black or being a minority in the partnership, or indeed in the country, it's just unknown. Because we all live in different social bubbles. And so reverse mentoring, where effectively a senior, I'm sure people know, but effectively a senior leader is mentored by a more junior partner, junior employee in the business, often of a different diversity background or racial background or different gender, has started to really unlock different sorts of conversations and starting to break down some of the stereotypes and limited progression.
Thanks very much, Sharon. I mean, the power of the personal story and connecting to people as human beings in that reverse mentoring. I love it. Great strategy. Steve, just in relation, I know Jacobs have done so much, and also I'd be interested to not just what you're doing, but how you measure success as well in your organisation.
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned, 2015, came into Jacobs, 55,000 employees, great company, but had hit the wall culturally, and it was obvious that we lacked diversity, and that was holding us back. And so the first thing companies do when they start talking about women, diverse gender diversity, is they start hiring entry-level people in functional positions. And what we recognized is that we needed to have full gender diversity from the top of the company, cascading down through. And so what we did intentionally was to reshape the whole executive leadership team, where we have an executive leadership team of 8. Today, 5 of those 8 executive leaders are now women, talented women, the best choice, by the way, when we went out and looked at reshaping the executive leadership team. Our board of directors today, 3 of our 9 independent directors are now women, and we still believe that's underrepresented, and we have a goal to go higher. And then our whole promotional people development process has been transformed, where we have diverse interview panels required now when we make promotional decisions, et cetera. We did unconscious bias training for the entire organization and made it a requirement. So and we had 100% participation in the last round of unconscious bias training. And the other powerful movement is we always had a women's network in the company, but it was sort of a bootleg type approach. The women just did it on their own. It was unfunded. We have now funded that network. I, along with one of our other female executive leaders, are co-sponsors of that women's network. So they have they now have a voice that helps represent them. And so when you look at all that, we've done well. But I will say we still have work to do. The middle of the company is still a block of lack of female diversity, and that's sort of the next wave of completing what the picture of what we need to achieve and to be a great company, as Federico said. As far as measuring success, I'd say it's really 2 areas. It's how our company feels, and we do a very unique organizational health assessment. We get feedback on how our people perceive our cultural evolution, and so that's obviously the most important. But the others is again, how are we viewed internally and externally? And I'm proud that as a company we've been now lately getting feedback. We have had a 100% score in LGBTQ equality. We women on boards, the HRC Foundation. The Boards W winning company is rated us as one of the companies that are exceeding expectations on board of directors. We've been rated as by now Forbes as one of the best places to work. Fortune 2020 is one of the number 1 most admired company in our industry sector, and a whole host of other feedback that kind of gives us a sense that we're moving in the right direction.
Thanks very much, Steve. Just Federico, now passing to you, because YOOX Net-a-Porter, you have operations in many countries of the world, but particularly in China and then Italy. And the fact is the pandemic hit your operations quite early. And I know at that time you really took a strong philosophical decision on the safety of your people. So I was interested to see whether you could just talk to us about that, what you learned and some of the actions that you've taken.
Yes, thank you, Elizabeth. I believe that global companies like ours, probably they acted faster than the governments, simply because we had this international network and we operated like a kind of the United Nations. So, for example, when the pandemic started in China, I immediately learned from our Chinese colleagues, which means that I started ordering masks in February, and basically, like in Italy, which was the first country in the Western world to be hit by the COVID, we were ready. We were ready because we were already in smart working. So I put everybody in smart working before the official lockdown given by the government. And the same we did then in the UK and then in the US. So basically the wave of the pandemic, we were able to anticipate by 1 week or 2 the different governments that they were very much local. So I think one of the, let's say, big learning from this terrible tragedy is that the government, they should have collaborated more. Within a company, a global company, we collaborated by definition because we had all this network. One of the biggest and most difficult decisions for an entrepreneur and for a manager, for someone that is running a business, was about the trade-off between business and, in a way, human lives. Because, I mean, obviously this decision has been faced by all the governments, but also by the business leaders. And at a certain point in the month of March and April, I've taken the decision, that has been a very difficult decision, to close down the distribution centers. So the Italian one, and the UK one, and the American one. Obviously, this means that we could have stayed open, because e-commerce was one of the industries that they were left open by the different governments, both the Italian, the UK, and so on. So, and I have to say that most of my competitors, they stayed open, which made my decision even more difficult, no, vis-a-vis the shareholders and so on. And but we closed down for 3-4 weeks, depending on the different warehouses in the different countries, because we were at the peak of the pandemic, and I felt that it was the right thing to do for our people, because they were all terrified, all worried to go to work, and I felt that it was better to make sure that they were healthy and safe and protect them, rather than continuing to run the business for that month of April. So during the month of April, basically, we lost a lot of sales. But I think I would do it again if I were asked, for the simple reason that now, first of all, during the month of closure, we made sure that we put in place safety measures, like extreme safety measures, beyond any protocol, beyond any government rules. And now, when I went to the warehouse in Milan a couple of days ago to congratulate with the people working there, and I've never seen so many happy faces, in the sense that they respected the decision, they appreciated the decision, and now that they see that everything is in place, everything is safe, I mean, they understand that they belong and they work for a company with a soul, which is a YOOX Net-a-Porter.
Thanks very much, Federico. And I know that at that time also you used the vans that you ordinarily would have used to transport NHS workers. So really, once again, like the three organisations that are represented on the panel, such a strong social impact as well, which I think when you lead with purpose, these decisions become very, very clear. We've got a couple of questions now coming in from our audience. And the first question that I've got is, what are the biggest obstacles you as leaders see to driving organisational change on a daily basis? And how do you overcome such barriers? So I don't know if anyone wants to jump in and answer that first.
I'll jump in. That, you know, a company of our size, I mentioned it a bit in my remarks, is that you don't always get this cascading down through the organization. And what I call it is that somewhere in this, 400 offices around the world, global organization, we've got a clay layer that's blocking the culture from flowing up and down. And that became obvious. And so what we're doing is just hitting that head on. We're actually bringing in several thousand leaders at all levels in groups of 30 to go through a multi-day leadership training, which we don't outsource to some organization. We actually do this with us, starting with myself participating in each of the training, explaining the culture that we want to achieve, and basically holding people, leaders, accountable. And now we put it in leaders' bonus as far as annual compensation to achieve the culture, the diversity that we want to have in the company.
Thanks for that, Steve. Sharon, did you want to add something?
Yeah, and I'd say similar to Steve, that it's very much the sort of middle tier. And for us, we've got, we're a very historic company, 1864. There's a huge amount of, heritage and pride about what the partnership has achieved. And I think for us then, sort of taking our people through the case for change in an organisation that's already very strong on purpose and values, I think the senior tier has turned out to be much more straightforward than the middle. So comparing numbers, we're 83,000. We may be UK only, but we're a very, very large business. And I think part of it actually rests with customer insight. So a lot of the discussions we're having at the moment are the opportunities that we are missing as a business because we're not sort of leading in sufficiently into modern Britain, and the fact that affluent families now come of different shapes and sizes and greater diversity. And so trying to sort of link in the sort of commercial case and the commercial imperative so that we remain relevant, we stay relevant, then reflecting into our people, reflecting our customers, I think is going to be a really important way for as an unblocker. But basically, it's sort of bringing on side that middle tier, particularly the sort of tier that's just between sort of head offices and the store level is really critical for us.
Thanks very much, Sharon. And I'm just running to another question now. We've got questions coming in from our audience. So during this period of the last 3 to 4 months, when there's been such disruption, such turbulent times, what's the number one takeaway that you've learned? What will you apply into the future for your business? So take the number one takeaway and what will you apply into the future for your business? Anyone want to start with that?
Well, I'll jump in again. I think the number one takeaway is the speed of decision making. We always made sure we had the right answer before we launched an initiative, and the COVID-19 crisis put us into action where we needed to make decisions in minutes and hours. And I think that's the big change that we're going to be taking forward, is breaking down the bureaucracy around decision making and moving much quicker.
Yeah, I agree with Steve. Absolutely. I mean, being an e-commerce company, technology company, speed is in our DNA. But during these months, we definitely had to accelerate many decisions. And I have maybe to say one more thing, that the speed was also possible because also of a full alignment with the shareholders. Because like the managers, they can take decisions. But for example, the one of closing down the distribution center, I could do it because I was fully aligned with our shareholder, Johan Rupert of Richmond, that he immediately said, go ahead. And because he's a visionary man, he's focused on the long term. And so having 1 month of closure, it didn't change his life. And so the speed and the alignment across the organization, across the managers, across the shareholders was key. And I think that's the most important thing.
I mean, I agree with Steve.
Sharon, did you want to add?
Yeah, just the only other point I would add for us is communication. So we have, all the feedback we've had from partners is that we have communicated more in the last 2 months, have been more open, more transparent. We didn't think we could have a video call between two offices in London, and we've now got 83,000 partners able to dial into a WebEx. And that, I think, is going to be as transformational as the speed of decision making.
Thanks, Sharon. So we've got lots of questions coming in, but I'll just ask another one. Is it possible to predict the next trends in working remotely? And if so, what shifts in company culture do you predict? I mean, do you want your organizations to go back to normal, is the question. So I'll hand it over. I've got my own views on that, but I'll hand it across. Steve, do you want to? Or?
Yeah, so that's a big initiative for us right now. We're in the middle of getting back to the workplace, in the early, I shouldn't say in the middle, early stages. And it's all based on health statistics and, government restrictions, et cetera. But we are not going to return to the workplace the way we left it. That would be a huge mistake. But at the same time, you can't just turn the switch on of the future of work. But so what we've actually been fighting off is to try to say, okay, X% are going to continue to work from home and Y% are going to go to the office. We're kind of moving forward to a hybrid full flexibility case, to where we just have a new vision for our workspaces, that our offices won't be the type of office in the future where you where when people do go in, that it's a cubicle, or it's going to be a place to collaborate. It's going to be a place to get trained. It's going to be a place to have some face-to-face engagement, and that'll look completely different than it looks now. But we'll also provide employees the flexibility that maybe they do that on 1 or 2 days, but the other days they're working from home. And some may want to work full-time from an office. Some may want to work full-time from home. I think it's going to be a fully flexible future with a whole different real estate footprint.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. And flexibility, the heart of that being choice, as you say there. So I don't know whether Federico,
Yeah, so the Latins were saying in medius stat virtus, and I think which means that the answer stays in the middle, which I believe, I've asked this question to our 5,500 employees, I think a month ago, through our internal workplace, and obviously, like most of our employees, they loved it. They loved the smart working. We were already in 2 days of smart working out of 5 on the 1st of January 2020, so we were ahead of time in a certain way. At the same time, I think that going back to the office is essential for certain projects, for certain events, for certain task force, and probably I would, I'm supporting a kind of a 50-50 smart working and working in the office, and we are also like good. For example, in London, we have a tech hub in London that has been designed by Sir Nick Grimshaw a couple of years ago, and actually, this great architect imagined already a workplace where basically people will collaborate. At the same time, they will be like also isolated, and so we find ourselves basically with a workplace in London that is perfect for this new norm. And this probably is just luck for me.
Thanks very much, Federico. We might all hop over there if you're not careful to my workplace. And Sharon, well, one of the things that has come in, just the final question, because we've got about 5 minutes left, is how do you handle or mitigate employee, how are you ensuring you lift up all women, not only white women? And I think just from my own experience here in Australia, one of the things we've seen is that the women's movement has disproportionately elevated white women and hasn't really addressed well the intersectional issues.
Yeah.
So just want to have that.
Yeah. And I think that's very common to women's networks everywhere. Mm. So we've in fact quite recently, so we've just started to set up what we're calling sort of safe spaces or safe havens, listening groups for our Black women who interestingly were finding and this has partly happened with the Black Lives Movement, that sort of lots of white women and lots of white partners have wanted to join their forums to sort of listen and learn to their experience. And actually what the Black women have said, actually, that's great, but we also need some space where we can support each other and share stories which are very uniquely ours. And I think doing this in a way that isn't going to present itself as divisive, but is demonstrating to the whole organisation that actually each of us with our sort of intersectionality needs our space, and then to be able to raise the messages, the stories which are very uniquely ours. But I absolutely see the risk, and we've tried to mitigate. I don't say that we've been completely successful, but by trying to provide some spaces, forums, online and physical spaces for Black women to really meet, support each other, and to have their own channels of raising messages and concerns through to the exec team.
Thanks very much, Sharon. I think, it's such an important message, safe spaces, but also allies as well. So, and it's such a hugely complex issue as well. But thanks so much for those comments. And unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap it up. So I just want to thank everyone of our panelists. Not only is it such a delight to be interviewing you, but it's a delight to be connected to you much more generally, and just to watch the work you're doing in the world. Because as someone who cares so deeply about equality across the world. I mean, I know every one of you not just talks about it, but absolutely lives it. So thank you, Steve. Thank you, Sharon. And thank you, Federico, for joining this panel. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you, the audience, enjoyed it. And I'll now hand back to Laura.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Liz.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Liz, and thank you so much to all of you for joining, wonderful panelists, and for your incredible leadership in these difficult times. Thanks everyone for being on the line too. Please do stick around for our next panel, which is Mental Health and Microsteps with Ariana Huffington and Reva Misra.